Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome back to the Catholic Mama. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Thank you for joining me on this episode where we, my husband and I, hello husband.
Hello, hello.
Hello. Are going to dive into making the pro-life argument. So this is incredibly important, obviously, but we'll talk about why that is obvious or should be obvious. But in light of the recent horrible new law in New York and in other states around the United States, as well as just we just had the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, March for Life, all these pro life and abortion events are happening right now, and unless you've been living under a rock, then you know that there are lots of arguments that have been going on social media, and I'm sure in people's homes and offices as well. So Pat has agreed to join me on this episode. You wanted to add?
No, I mean, well, yes.
We're going to have lots of talking.
Something to add. The first thing is to understand how critically important this is. It's also not optional for Catholics. To say that you're Catholic and pro-choice is to say that you're a square circle. It just doesn't make sense. Yeah, I'm Catholic, but I'm actually an atheist. What the heck are you talking? You mean you're just not Catholic, right? Like, the great thing about the Catholic faith is that there's this little book called the Catechism, and it outlines so clearly what the Church teaches, what the essential doctrine and tenets of the faith are. So if you believe that Catholicism is true, which you should, because it is true, then you should not only accept the teachings of the Church, but you should want to. You should want to accept the teaching of the Church, trusting that the Church is to accept the teaching of the Church, trusting that the Church is ultimately and principally guided by the Holy Spirit. And to not want to do that is really it's not like you're arguing with men and like just the bishops. You're arguing with God. Right? Now, if you don't think Catholicism is true, we have a deeper problem. But if you're Catholic and you do think it's true, then to want to turn away from church teaching or deny church teaching just makes absolutely zero sense. And this is a non-negotiable for Catholics, and it's also a non-negotiable on voting either. And this would be tough for anybody, but the truth is like you might have opinions on other issues. You might have opinions on taxes or health care or this or that. But if it comes down to voting for somebody who's pro-choice or pro-life, you have to vote pro-life. Like this is
otherwise you're saying if you like somebody's social program or tax policy that trumps human life.
Well, yeah,
that trumps human life.
Well, yeah, that's exactly. And I'll give you an example. Like I'm not a high tax guy. I'm a business owner. We're constantly crushed by taxes. Small business owner. I will give you all the arguments for why higher taxes are actually not a good thing. But just put that aside and we just let that just even be my personal opinion for now. We don't need to get into that. But as much as I would want lower taxes, especially for business owners, if it came down to having to vote for somebody who was going to raise my taxes but end abortion versus somebody who was going to lower my taxes but be pro-choice, I would have to vote to have my taxes raised. I would, and I would gladly do so. So it doesn't matter how you feel on other issues, right? This is about the sanctity and the infinite dignity of human life. And anything else that we can make an argument for, and this is really the starting argument for the pro-life, can only be of instrumental value to the life, can only be of instrumental value to the intrinsic value that is human life. You can't even make sense of anything else as having value unless you first acknowledge that there's inherent or intrinsic value in human life. And right there is honestly the refutation of the abortion argument, because it says that the right for a woman to choose, or the right to property or privacy, right, somehow trumps the right to life. But that's absurd, because property, choice, privacy, these are things that can only possibly be of instrumental value if you already affirm that there's intrinsic value in human life. So to the extent that you would ever put something of instrumental value over the intrinsic value that it depends on is a straight contradiction. It's just a profound contradiction. You cannot make sense of it. And that's what the abortion or pro-choice thing does. It takes something that is only abortion or pro-choice thing does. It takes something that is only of instrumental value. To even say that you value somebody's choice only makes sense if you're at least implicitly, if not explicitly, saying that you value them as a person, which means you value their life. So then to try and put that at odds with the value of life itself makes absolutely no sense. It's incoherent. You cannot logically get it off the ground. Now, unfortunately, people aren't thinking logically when it comes to these things, so we have to go a little bit deeper than that. But to even understand right at the very start, it's just a fundamental contradiction, the pro-choice. For any serious-minded person, for anybody who does value reason, you should see the absurdity of this right away. So there's my opening statement.
Okay. That's very well said. I don't think I can say anything else towards that. Now, I think we've mentioned this on podcast before. Didn't we do one? Yeah, about how to have a good religious argument or moral argument. Well, which one was it? Religious, moral? I can't remember. Yeah, something like that. So, but if you haven't listened to that episode, that's a great one. Go back and listen to that. I invited Pat on that one, and again for this one, he is great at debate. Look, I made a little rhyme. Yes, and he does not shy away from it, and doesn't make the common mistakes that people usually do, like attacking the person or throwing out straw men, whatever it is. I mean, you make very good, clear, coherent arguments, and especially in something that's such a volatile, contentious topic for people. You need to have that clear understanding of what you're arguing for and how to go about doing that. So I'm going to be here because I want to learn from you with this as well. You debate, because then maybe I'll win when we have our...
Oh, sure, yes. Let me teach you all my secrets. Well, it's not like when we get into our little, can we call them debates? We're pointing out red herrings and non sequiturs.
Excuse me, that's an ad hominem.
Yeah, no, it's they might be a little bit more emotional in that at times.
No.
But no, when you're having religious argument or serious argument, and that's what argument means, is giving reasons for a conclusion. It shouldn't be a bitter or resentful thing. The fact
that's for people who are being clear-headed and logical, which you don't find on Facebook.
No, so
right, somebody posts something. Hey, Iowa has this heartbeat law. Which is great.
Yep.
It should be stricter than that, but that's the step in the right direction. And then everybody just starts shrieking and
it is
throwing stones.
It's very petulant. It's exceedingly petulant. So I guess, if we'll talk about some of the arguments to make, some of the arguments not to make. I mean, I already made one of them, right? Just showing that you really cannot coherently resolve in the pro-choice thing. Position. It's really a pro-abortion. I hate the pro-choice.
It's such a euphemism.
But you know what? When you're having the argument, here's a tactic right away. Be charitable, right? Don't even. I'm not saying the position deserves charity. It's abhorrent. But if you want to actually get through to a person, if you come out as polemic as possible, then all their defenses are going to go up. They're going to be incredible. It's emotional enough. So yeah, like you could use things like pro-murder and stuff like that. And obviously I do think abortion is murder. But is it wise to start with that type of language? Generally, no.
You save that for later.
Yeah, you save it for later because people will get there eventually. And you brought up the example of the Iowa heartbeat, and you're referencing a few debates that I've recently got in. And I showed you them, and I took screenshots of them for a case study because they were so typical. Where I'll go into these den of harpies, essentially, and talk about not being polemic, but that's what it is of all these people. So that's the one thing, right? When you go to make this argument online, especially if you're not doing it in your community, just get ready to be mobbed. Just expect that you'll be mobbed, and you just don't let that bother you because the people who are mob you are typically like I said, very petulant, very childlike, and you just keep a cool head and you make your arguments, and they will screech and they will yell and they will name call and they will bully, and you just understand that. Because what people don't often realize is that there's so many people who are watching from the sidelines, for example, who will see you in there getting mobbed, getting bullied by these radical, often feminists, is typically who it is. They're name calling. They're just being nasty. They're not hardly ever making an argument, hardly ever. And you'll be there making cool, level-headed arguments. And then for the outsiders who might be on the fence or who might be open-minded, those are the people you can and will often influence. So don't always have it in your mind that you're going to change who's ever being incredibly shrill, across the internet that you're talking with. You're probably not going to change their mind right away. They're so emotionally set in their position. They've parked their identity fully in murdering young children, and they have to rationalize it because they can't face up to the facts of what they're doing. It's too painful. We wish they would, and we wish that they would turn and repent from this. This is a position that I've changed my views on, and you have as well. Even though I was always pro-life, I was one of those. I'm pro-life from a personal standpoint. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, you do you.
But because I was very libertarian. Now I'm completely not that anymore. So it's not like I always held this view, or you did. No, we both changed our minds on.
Oh
this.
Yeah, I would have been one of the screeching ones.
You would have been one of the harpies.
Yes,
yeah.
But I seem to be susceptible to reason. So
it does work on
it.
some people.
It does.
It actually works on a lot of people, but these will the people who probably won't actually get into the threads if you're doing it online, or who might not speak up if you're doing it in a classroom. But maybe they'll tap you on the shoulder after class and be like, hey, what you said actually made a lot of sense. Thank you for saying something. Or they'll send you a personal message in your inbox. Hey, I saw you on the thread. Like, I'm really sorry that you had to deal with those people. They were so nasty. Thanks for saying something. And you're like, oh, glad you enjoyed the show, but thanks for hopping in. But you have to realize that's the nature of it. People don't want to get in these debates because the other side is just so nasty about it all the time. And they as you saw in those two examples, right? So what happened? In both of those examples, I just laid out an argument. I wasn't mean. I was direct. I gave the reasons of why I believe that abortion is morally unacceptable and needs to be banned, which we'll talk about in this episode. And then the first person just responds with an ad hominem that and here's the typical one you see is as a male, who am I to have any opinion? And not just a male, but a straight white male. Now the irony is this person is about and I know them because they're a distant cousin of mine, is about as liberal as it gets. So the fact that he immediately assumes my gender is a little ironic. But
I don't think consistency can really be applied as a virtue or something to any of this.
I hate to be, again, overly polemic, but it is true. But that's what we would call a classic ad hominem attack. It's an attack against the man. So like, if we're making abortion arguments, and I was just talking to my friend Peter about this, like, just imagine that Christine just said what I said. Does that change your view on the argument? It doesn't matter if it's a man making it or a woman making it. Either the argument is good, either the reasons provided are convincing, or they're not. It doesn't matter if are convincing or they're not. It doesn't matter what the genital equipment is of the person making it's either a good argument or it's bad. So you either have to address the argument or you have to concede that you just don't have a principled position. And that was the first response we get. And then the second response was some very condescending lady saying, newsflash, the Bible doesn't consider the fetus a life. Now, this one was even more ironic because nothing about my original argument even referenced the Bible at all. It wasn't even a religious argument. And that's another point I'll make, is when making the pro-life case, I always never try to make the argument from a religious perspective because it just invites too many points that aren't worth dealing with, and the case could be made purely philosophically. And that's how you should make it. So you don't need to bring the Bible into it. But somebody's knee-jerk response, the fights back then, didn't reference the Bible, I didn't reference religion at all, was to make an honestly very idiotic statement. The Bible doesn't consider the fetus a life. And then I went into it and said, well, I don't know what Bible you're reading, and then listed all those verses. And of course there was no response after that. But
well, yeah, I know as a religious person and seeing many of these these debates online that maybe didn't have anything to do with you. I was just finding them anyway, where as a religious person, you may feel most comfortable by giving a religious reason for why this is immoral, but you're arguing for a religious or an objective reference point for somebody who doesn't even believe in it in the first place.
Yeah.
So that you're not even arguing on the same level at that point.
Yeah, they'll just call you a Bible thumper, and it just
and then you're dead in the water with your argument right there.
Yeah, and it's unnecessary to do that, because again, the pro-life position is something that can be argued entirely philosophically. Unless, there's very, very few exceptions where if somebody's like a total moral nihilist, you'll have to pick up a new line of argument. But that isn't where you'll typically wind up. So when it comes to, the view on abortion, it really should come down to whether or not you think humans actually do have intrinsic or objective moral worth. And here's where it's useful, because almost everybody does believe that. Almost everybody believes that. Again, with the very few exceptions of people who pretend to be moral nihilists, and this is very few, and a few people may try and duck out into that, but 99.9% of cases, you're not going to find that. You're not going to find the person who says, no, actually, I just don't think humans are valuable and we can just murder them at all. Now, if that is a person's perspective, then why should we attach to anything of value? So we don't even have to pay attention to them. You can just push them along. It's just stupid, right? It's just like, why would I value the opinion of something that's valueless? Right?
It's good.
No, it's just dumb. But that isn't going to be most people anyways. Most people are going to think, no, there is some type of objective moral worth to humanity. But I just don't think that that a fetus is a person, essentially what it comes down to. And this is where the pro-choice position is exceedingly weak. So, because not only do you have the best scientific evidence, irrefutable biological fact that life begins at conception, that all the DNA coding is there. I mean, you pick up any textbook on embryology, they all agree on this basic fact that life begins at conception. So if it has human parents, it's a human, and if it's alive, it's growing. That's the easiest way. Or if it's growing, it's alive.
Yeah, so there's a 10...
Easiest way. Or if it's growing, it's alive.
Yeah, so there's a 10-second apologetic in Trent Horn's book, Persuasive Pro-Life, where it sums it up. It's, if it has human parents, it's human, isn't it? If it's growing, it's alive, and if it's if it's a human, then it has value, and it should be treated as such.
And it really is as simple as that. It honestly is that if you think that human beings have objective moral worth, that they are valuable in and of themselves, right, and that you shouldn't kill them, which almost everybody does, then you just look at that. Okay, with human parents, what else could it possibly be? And is it alive? Well, yeah, it is alive. It's growing. It's developing.
Yeah, but then you have the argument where, well, some lives matter more than others. The woman who is 30-some years old and has many years ahead of her still, has many, 30 years behind her. Does she have more value than a potential life that we don't know what they're going to do?
Yeah, so that comes down, and this is where the argument will typically go, is are human beings objectively morally valuable either by what they are or what they can do? That's where the argument comes down. And when it comes to trying to make value a matter of degree or accumulation, the pro-choice problem is that you cannot find a principled, non-arbitrary way to assume or acquire value. And you see this because they can't all agree on where that value would be accumulated.
Is it 16 years old because you can drive and get a job? Or right?
Yeah, first off, is it age?
Yeah.
Is it size? Is it level of development? Is it degree of dependency? Is it a heartbeat? Is it cognitive function? Is it intelligence? And nobody agrees on this because you can't. It's totally arbitrary. It's entirely arbitrary. And if you pick, so just remember the acronym SLED. That's another easy way. Size, level of development, environment, or dependency. Because that's typically where they will try to say, now this is where a human being has value. Or they'll try and say this is where they become a person. Arbitrarily becomes a person, right? Now, personhood is really defined by membership of the human species, which again is really right there at the start. And as this became more aware and more undeniable, That's where the pro-choice argument you really tried unsuccessfully to separate personhood from humanity. They're always considered the same thing. They are the same thing. But it became so problematic for the pro-choice position that they tried to remove personhood from humanity and say, no, personhood is something that you just get somehow, right? But this is a problem because value obviously isn't dependent on size. And you'll hear this, well, that fetus is only like 2 inches, that's it. Well, it's like, is somebody who's 8 feet tall more valuable than somebody who's 6 feet tall, or more valuable than 4 feet? Like how the heck do you make principled sense of that? You can't. Or it's rationality. Okay, is somebody with more rationality or a higher IQ more valuable than like a lower IQ? Like, is that person more worthwhile as a human being? Or environment, it's viability. Well, you're not viable on Mars. Can I take you up there and dismember you limb from limb? Or you're not viable after a car accident, or you're dependent on insulin, so let's just put the needle in your head and then be done with you, right? If that's it. Or degree of dependency. Well, none of our kids are dependent or independent. If we left them, they'd all probably croak horribly if we left the house. Certainly don't want to imagine that. One might argue that I'm hardly dependent. You probably would argue that yourself, right?
Without takeout, I don't know what you would do.
But the point is, these are all arbitrary, non-principled distinctions of trying to say that humans have value by what they can do rather than what they are, which is objectively absurd. Either humans have intrinsic moral worth or they don't. And if you think that value is something that can be accumulated by degrees, then you better be willing to ride that out in its consequences, and because it all applies as much outside of the womb as it does inside. And you run into these really horrific... I mean, it's all horrific. And what these examples go to show is just how horrific abortion actually is. Because if you believe this, then you trot out the toddler and you see that, everything that you just said about the child in the womb also applies to the child out of the womb. They haven't hit the age of rationality yet. They're not independent. They're not a certain size, right? Should we do that? Or they're living in that's the other thing, right? Well, they'll live in poverty. We'll trot out a toddler that's in poverty. Just because they're in poverty or just because they don't have a lot of food. Should we be able to kill them? Right? So any of these things, just always remember, if somebody's trying to place value in what a person can do rather than what they are, then they're making a really bad, arbitrary argument. And nobody actually believes that. Nobody believes that somebody becomes more or less valuable because of what they can do outside of the womb. So why should we believe that it's any different inside of the womb?
So say somebody makes that argument. Would you suggest then hitting any of those size... my mind's blanking. Environment.
SLED. So think of SLED.
I know
size, level of
that's
development,
Thank you.
environment, and degree of dependency.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So somebody makes that argument. Well, they might be in poverty their whole lives. Well, that's not fair. It's a mercy killing in a way. So then you would bring out that, well, here's a toddler. How do you proceed?
Yeah. So the idea, where are you discriminating here? Because that's what you're doing. You're discriminating. Size, level of development, environment, or degree of dependency. And then you can, tie those to any number of examples outside of the womb. Like we said, you're not viable on Mars. Somebody who's 8 feet tall, more valuable than somebody who's 2 feet tall, so on and so forth, right? And then other things in terms of poverty or rape, just trot out a toddler. Just remember that, trot out a toddler. Well, this 5-year-old was conceived in rape. Should we kill him or her? Right? Is their life not valuable? And that's such a bad argument, because in like no theory of ethics or moral philosophy do you ever repay one injustice with another injustice. And that's what the argument for abortion in the case of rape is really saying, is that we're going to punish an innocent human being for the injustice committed by a not innocent human being.
Yeah, it's a little ironic, is I guarantee people probably enjoy that misattributed quote of Gandhi, eye for an eye and the world is blind. Mm-hmm. Yet here we are.
Yep, and that's exactly it. And nobody is happy that anybody got raped, right? But an infinitely valuable human life is an infinitely valuable human life. And the person who deserves to be punished is the rapist. Like, that person should be castrated, put in jail, whatever the appropriate degree of punishment is. But you don't repay one injustice with another injustice. That is just, I mean, if there's anything that is just a foundational moral principle, surely that is it. So yeah, you trot out the toddler in these examples when people make the poverty argument. Well, there's many toddlers in poverty. Does that mean we just go in and here's the killing field, right? It's just, no, everybody knows that would be morally obscene and unacceptable. So when you make these distinctions outside of the womb, hopefully we pray to God that it becomes more obvious. But at that point, they might just say, yeah, I'm actually a nihilist. And this is their escape hatch. They'll become a nihilist. They just say, no, humans don't really have value. But then again, well, then I don't need to value your opinion, right? I don't need to value the opinion of a valueless person. So if they want to try and duck out of the argument, that's fine, but they've just lost any credit. You can only value somebody's opinion if you value them as a person, right? But if they say that people have to value us, I don't need to value your opinion. So we can argue against nihilism in other ways, but they've immediately just sawed off the branch they're sitting on with that approach.
All right. Are there any other arguments that we should be making?
Well, there's. I mean, those are the most important to get clear and just you know what? Sometimes it helps always ask a person like, hey, do you think that like humans are intrinsically valuable or objectively valuable? And just see. And most people will say, yeah. But then they will be like, okay, well then. But then they will be like, okay, well then. Do you think that that abortion is ending the life of an innocent human being? Because obviously you think that would be wrong, right? And then if they're honest and willing to have a discussion, then that's where you can go through SLED and trot out a toddler, and that will pretty much deal with either the discrimination of why they think that a fetus isn't a human when it is, or situations that should merit abortion even if they admit that it's a human, but we wouldn't apply in any other circumstance. So those are the two things to be aware of. People either denying that it's a human when it is, or they will say, okay, it's a human, but there are situations that would make this action morally justified. And that's where you think of, well, trot out a toddler, and would that be? And the answer is no. There is no moral justification for it.
Yeah, I think too, if you're having a hard time figuring out, maybe they just say, no, women have the right to choose, and you want to engage in some kind of debate with the person who makes a very blanket statement. You're not sure where their hang up is, and they're not screeching, then maybe that's a good time to say, oh, okay, well, just ask a question or two to see where you need to jump into this.
So when it comes to the right to choose, you can ask them, be like, don't you think that the right to choose only makes sense if we first value a person's right to life? How can we value a right to property or privacy or choice if we don't value the foundational principle of the right to life? Obviously, your right to choose means nothing if I can just eliminate you at any point in existence, right? And that goes back to the very argument we made at the beginning. There's the things that are of instrumental value, and the one thing that isn't of beginning. There's the things that are of instrumental value, and the one thing that isn't of intrinsic value. So again, the only reason that we value things like property, the only thing we value things like choice, the only reason we value things like privacy is because we value the person who is capable of obtaining or using those instrumental values. That's it. So it's good that we all value choice, but every society reasonably puts limits on choices so that way society can function and protect life, right? And where do we draw that line? Well, typically we draw the line where one person's choices are harmful to another person, which is exactly the thing with abortion. This is why we outlaw drunk driving, for example, but not necessarily drunkenness. Now, drunkenness isn't great, but we don't outlaw it because, it might not hurt another person, but drunk driving very likely will. Well, same thing with abortion, right? Is like the reason we're limiting that choice is the same reason we limit your choice not to go drunk driving, because you're not just likely hurting somebody, you're absolutely killing an innocent person. So that's where you make the move with the abortion debate. The first move is just to get clear on the morality, and then the second is to get clear on the legality. And that's a pretty easy move to make, is because once you say, like, okay, we need to protect innocent human life, well, here's a clear example where human life's being violated. And in all other instances of society, if laws are for anything, surely they're to protect life. And we constantly limit choices in instances where people's choices can harm other people. So it makes perfect sense to do it in the case of abortion.
That does make perfect sense.
Should.
It does.
Look, folks, the Catholic position is utterly reasonable. It makes sense. It's God's truth, right? Of course it's going to make sense. It's going to be consistent. Now, the other thing I want to say, to be fair, there are hard cases. The life of the mother, for example. But it's important to realize this is less than 1% of all abortions. Less than 1%. So the first thing you can say is, like, okay, can we at least agree that, except for in the case of the life of the mother, that abortion is bad? And just see what people say there. Like, and then, like, if we can agree that, then maybe we can talk about the hard cases. But can we first agree that, except for in the case of a mother's life, that abortion is wrong? And just see what people say. And most of the time they actually won't say yes, believe it or not, because they're just using the exceptions to try and inform the rule. And we never do that. We never use the exceptions to inform the rule. Now, in like hard cases, I was just talking to Peter, who's a bioethicist on this. First off, the pro-life position, and this is important to emphasize, is not just pro-life for the baby, but it's pro-life for the mother. It's pro-life for everybody. It affirms the intrinsic value of human beings, every single one of them, regardless of size, level of development, environment, dependency. And we want life and the value of life for everybody. So don't let people make it seem like the pro-life is just the life of the baby, but against the life of the mother. That's absolutely not it. But there are, of course, hard cases, usually in very early stages of pregnancy, where things can go wrong. But this is something that can be successfully navigated by ethicists and pro-life positions where, okay, there might be a procedure where we need to perform to save the life of the mother, but it doesn't mean actively killing the child. Now, that procedure might result in the death of the child because of what we do to save the mother, but it doesn't mean we actually have to kill the child to perform the procedure, if that makes sense. Now, an analogy actually makes this somewhat useful. It's a situation like this. Imagine that there's two people out drowning in the sea, and you only have time to save one. Well, you have to make a decision, so you save one and the other person drowns. And that's unfortunate. That's sad. But you did the best you could, right? But the abortion position is actually you can only save one. But why are you going to save the person A? You shoot person B. That's abortion. And there's no reason that you need to shoot person B to save person A. Now, by saving person A, person B may die. And that describes what happens in often the very rare hard cases of pregnancy. But that's the ethical decision that you can make, is saying, I'm really going to do my best to save the mother here. But my intention is not to kill the baby. Now, the baby might die, but that's not my intention. My intention is to save the mother. But I certainly don't need to directly intend killing the baby to do that. And that's a very principled and important distinction to make. Now, this is the very, very rare exception of cases, right? And we don't use exceptions to inform the rule, but even there it can be successfully navigated. And the National Right to Life Committee, the Catholic Church, they understand these hard cases. And even though the National Right to Life Committee says that abortion should be banned, there are exceptions where we need to make these considerations, of course, for the life of the mother. Now, the sort of semantic ambiguity of these horrific laws in New York is that they don't just focus on the life of the mother. They use the term health in wholly ambiguous ways that can mean really any reason you want. That's really what it can mean, any reason you want. And the health of a mother is not equivalent to the life of a mother. Let's be honest. Like, we could talk mental health, physical health,
financial health,
spiritual health. I'm sure somebody is going to claim that at some point. So really just anything that you think is an inconvenience to you. And plus, give me a break. There's no such thing as having a child that results, at least not in initial better mental health. I mean, what the heck is that? You're living in a fantasy world? You have children. Your sleep's going to go down. You're going to be more stressed, right? There's no way you're having a child. And now, overall, I think your quality of life is going to immensely improve, and you're going to have many opportunities to become a much greater person. But yeah, you're probably going to be more stressed. you're absolutely going to be more stressed. So this idea of health is so ridiculous and absurd. And it's intentionally ambiguous, as these laws intend to be, to make it seem good on the surface. It's like, oh, please, everybody vote for the only good things can happen but nothing bad act, right? And how they name these laws and how they position them, because they're crafty. They're devils. They're inspired by the devil. There's no doubt about that. So you have to be careful about this. The health does not mean life for the mother. It's wholly ambiguous. It's purposely ambiguous. They purposely don't want to define it because they want it to be open and things like that. So you just got to be aware of that stuff too. Be aware of that stuff too.
It's a dangerous time to make any really big decisions anyway. I mean, having been pregnant several times now, I can say that my hormones have made me make decisions that may not ever say things. Or, I mean, you're asking too. I mean, not to say that women are, wholly irrational when they're pregnant, but things are. You gotta have different hormones going on. It's just a dangerous time to make these. I mean, quite literally life and death decisions. Mm-hmm. I just don't like it. It's just all around. It's a terrible idea.
Yeah, well,
and then especially, I mean, how many? As a woman who has gone through hormonal changes. I mean, I've certainly, not that you would have ever noticed, my dear, but I've certainly said things or done things in a hormonal state that I've regretted afterwards.
Yes. Yeah, we all have. Yeah. And that's why the legality is also important, because, not everybody's a moral philosopher. Everybody has these basic moral intuitions. We know on a basic level the human life is valuable, and we live our lives according to that. But we can rationalize it, and we can deny it, and we can try and tell ourselves it's not a human life. So this is why we need laws in place that ban abortion, because people take moral signals from the legal system. They equate, it's legal, so it must be moral. People make these confusions. So the legal system does reflect a certain morality, and too often it's a false morality or a wrong one. So we not only need the legal system in place to protect human life and human unborns, but also to just make it very clear, like, no, this is
Sets the
wrong.
standard.
This isn't right. Now, we would hope that people are getting a proper moral formation from not just looking at the legal system of the United States, which is often abhorrent, but this is the way society is. People look at what's legal and they make moral inferences from there. I guess the other thing we say is pro-life arguments not to make, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of, hopefully we're giving you some good equipment to use. Everything we've said is philosophical. Nothing we've said points to the Bible. Nothing we've said points to religion. So, avoid saying the Bible says, because chances are you're probably not going to be. Now, look, if you're arguing with somebody like in your church, that's an acceptable thing. Like, look at the relevant passages, and we can list those out in the show notes that just make it obviously clear that I knew you in the before I formed you in the womb. And then you can even go to the Didache, which is the earliest catechism, 1st century, under moral prescriptions, and see the clear denunciation and condemnation of abortions and infanticide. The earliest Christian, it's always been there. Which again is the power of the Catholic Church. Talk about consistency, right? Or the Catholic Church, talk about consistency, right? Why is the Catholic Church against abortion? It always has been. It always has been. It always will be.
So avoid going straight to the Bible in most situations, because the people that you're probably arguing with are not on the same moral playing ground or playing field as you are.
Or at least, religious perspective. Now, again, if it's in your church or you're starting from the same starting point, that might make more sense. But generally, don't do that. The other thing is, don't make arguments that actually affirm the types of positions that the pro-choice people are making. And we talked about this the other time, what if you abort the next Beethoven? Now, that's a really bad argument, because it's again saying that somebody has value by what they can do rather than what they are. It doesn't matter if somebody's going to be the next Beethoven or not. What matters is that they're a human being. And because you're a human being, they have value. So it doesn't matter if they're Beethoven. What are some other bad ones? I tried not to spend too much time thinking. We were talking about these the other day.
I know the ableism one was a big one. Mm-hmm. With the Beethoven example was a big one.
Yeah, so starting from a religious standpoint or assuming a religious standpoint is one not to make. arguing, well, you could abort the next Beethoven or Socrates or the person who cures cancer, which, of course, that might be true, but that's not what we're basing the arguments off of. So I would just be careful of those.
You also don't have to, if somebody starts, saying something rather derogatory about the pro-life position, you don't have to meet them there necessarily. You can take the high road.
Yeah, you don't have to meet them there, and they'll be like, you're just trying to oppress women, and that's where you bring up the legal thing and say, look, again, it's reasonable and responsible in society to outlaw certain choices that harm other people. We do this all the time. There's nothing that people can do in an unlimited way in society, aside from maybe choose what they believe. That's it. You can't use speech that way. You can't use your body that way, right? We can't make unlimited choices with our body, right? My right, the choices of my body and what I do with my fist typically ends at the border of somebody's face, right? It's same thing with abortion, right? It's reasonable and responsible for society to outlaw certain choices to protect human life. If we agree that human life is worth protecting, we agree that it's a human, it's alive, it's valuable, then it's worth protecting, it's worth having laws against. It's nothing about some hobgoblin of a patriarchy floating around ephemerally, subterraneously, that we can never seem to get our hands on, but is magically oppressing everybody. It's nothing to do with that. It's about us thinking that human life is infinitely precious and worth saving, and wanting to have structures in place that actually eliminate oppression. Like, you want to talk about oppression, the people who are oppressed are the ones who never have any say in the matter. Anybody advocating for pro-choice is somebody who's already been born. Well, go figure that. Or, the people who were advocating for slavery were people who were already free. Go figure that. And maybe you don't want to start out with this line because they'll get super defensive, but I'm sorry, the abortion argument for pro-choice is just the same horrible types of moral justification that we saw in slavery. It's not a person. It's actually 3/5 of a person. Or the Holocaust. Oh, Jews aren't people. They're not really people. And you want to be on the right side of history. And that's what everyone's so concerned about, trying to be on the right side of history. You want to be on the right side of history, you get consistent with your moral thinking, right? You get clear and consistent on your moral principles and why you believe what you do. And then you'll see, no, the right side of history is the pro-life side. It's the one that values human life, that does not discriminate arbitrarily, and wants structures in place to help alleviate this oppression.
So that's a great note to end on. And you're getting a little raspy, so I don't know if you need to take a sip of something. Clear your throat a little. I know you've been a little under the weather the past week or so. And so thank you for doing all that talking, because I know that was probably tough on the throat. So speaking of getting those structures in place, vote pro-life no matter what. Doesn't matter. Just vote pro-life. Look at the candidates. I know that we have we always have elections coming up here or there in different places.
Yeah, and let me just add one more note. I wish this wasn't a political issue. Like, I wish it wasn't. Obviously, the pro-choice and pro-life are closely tied to either, Democrat or Republican. But I don't care where you're coming from politically. You don't have to give up your entire political ideology or identity and become pro-life. You don't. You don't have to do that. And in fact, that's just a ridiculous thing. Like, why should your view on economics or tax policy in any way bear on your view of abortion? These are entirely separate arguments. They need to be considered entirely independently. And too often what happens is people will come in on one issue for a political party and just assume every other issue and just rationalize it however they can. But the truth is the intelligent person, the honest person, thinks every issue through independently and makes up their mind that way. So wherever you fall politically, this is an invitation for everybody. Like, you should be pro-life no matter what. Democrat, Republican, independent, libertarian, it doesn't matter. Everybody should be pro-life and can be without having to change your other political views necessarily. So that's it. I'm done now.
Now, you mentioned a couple of times Peter the bioethicist. You and
political views necessarily. So that's it. I'm done
now. Now, you mentioned a couple of times Peter the bioethicist. You and Peter sat down for your podcast, The Pat Flynn Show, correct?
Correct.
To talk about the arguments against abortion from a bioethical standpoint.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So if for anyone who would like to dive deeper into these arguments and really arm yourselves a little bit better to face the den of harpies, or whatever, however Pat put it earlier.
The pterodactyl screechings.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. I really wish it wasn't that way. I wish that people could actually sit down and have a good... I much better enjoy actually arguing with people who can provide intelligent... that is stimulating.
Those aren't
to
the
me.
ones that shriek.
It's enormously frustrating when it's just screeching.
Yeah.
It's just enormously frustrating. Mm-hmm.
So, but you sat down with Peter, our bioethicist friend, discussed all of this. I'm going to add that in as a bonus episode this week, so look for that if you would like to dive deeper into this topic and, again, get yourself armed with even more in-depth arguments against abortion. Vote pro-life. Subscribe to the Catholic Mama podcast if you haven't already, and I hope you enjoy it, because these episodes come out full length on Tuesdays. Catechism Fridays. Pat mentioned the Catechism. My goodness, a handbook for life. That's Fridays, as the name implies, and then bonus episodes like this one that I'll be putting up with the bioethicist and Pat from his show. That way you won't miss them. Okay. I think that's it for tonight, right?
That's it.
Anything else? I know your voice is getting hoarser and hoarser by the minute.
Nope.
I got a joke for you. Want to end with a joke? Mm-hmm. What animal... I just realized when I said horse. What animal falls from the sky?
Birds.
That's what our son... They fly.
Yeah. If they die, they fall.
Oh my God, I saw a dead lobster today. Anyway, all right. In the store, it was kind of gross. No, what animal falls from the sky? A reindeer.
That's
all right. We'll add it on a positive note. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy-to-understand grown-up answers, the pared-down but not talked-down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.